Welcome back to the Donkey Vote podcast with Francis.
Tobias.
And George. These interviews will be focusing on the past careers of politicians before they entered parliament.
With a strong intention to our audience that anything is achievable no matter what you studied in university or college.
If you like this sort of content, please make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and share with your friends. Also, we are on YouTube and Spotify, so make sure you follow us on those platforms.
Make sure to follow us on Instagram as well to keep updated with the latest episodes and reels that we release.
Enjoy
the
the
interview.
Today we are joined by the member for Fisher in Queensland, Andrew Wallace. Andrew, thank you for joining us today.
Good to be with you, Francis and George.
Just for our audience out there who may not know an entire lot about you, could you give us a little brief description of yourself just before we start with the questions?
I've been the federal member for Fisher on the Sunshine Coast for the last 8 years. I'm a barrister by profession and a builder by trade. So I've done lots of different things in my life, and this is where I am at the moment.
Yeah, in federal parliament, did you think you'd ever enter federal parliament? I know that's probably one of our more later on questions, but I'll just put it out to you there. Did you think maybe 20 years back you'd be an MP?
Well, I hoped that I would be either. I hoped to be in public life in one way or another, whether it was a judge or a magistrate or in politics.
Quite interesting there. But yeah, we'll get straight into the questions. So our first question to you, Andrew, is how was your high school and university life? And do you have any memorable moments? And I think I know from reading a little bit about your backstory, you did go to university later on in life after you completed your trade.
I did. I hated school when I was in high school. I went to a school where none of my mates went to from primary school, and I think for the first 4 years I really struggled with being there. And then I struggled both academically and socially, and then in year 11 I had a teacher who I think brought out the best in me, and he was a great teacher, and something just clicked academically in me, and I started enjoying going to school. And then in year 12 I became one of the college leaders, and I loved year 12. I loved my year 11 and year 12, but hated the first 4 years.
I think that's quite interesting because a lot of people from my experience being in year 11 and year 12, you do bond a lot together as a cohort towards the end of your high school years. From year 7 to year 10, you're kind of all very separate in your own separate groups. And it isn't as enjoyable as, year 11, year 12, even though those 2 years are probably the two most stressful years in your high school life. It's a lot more enjoyable, I think. And I think George would agree with that sentiment as well.
Yeah, that's true.
It is quite interesting. But yeah, so do you have any specific memorable moments there, Andrew, that you'd like to share? If there's anything illegal, of course, don't put it on the podcast. I don't want you to get into legal trouble, but
Oh, look, I'm not going to incriminate myself here anyway. Oh, look, I've always, when I was at school age, from probably about the age of 14, I've always been involved in community service groups, whether it's the local church youth group or whatever, surf life saving. I've always been involved in some form of voluntary work. I think that we have an obligation to give back to our community, and I think volunteering is really going through a real a difficult period in Australia at the moment. We're having enough trouble getting people to work for a living, and let alone asking them to volunteer their time and not get paid. So what I would like to see us do at a federal political level and all tiers of government is really to be encouraging people to be giving back. And volunteering is not just for people when they're in their retirement years. You can be volunteering, whether it's if you've got young kids working at the kindy or their school or working on the PNC or, being the soccer coach, whatever it might be, it's so incredibly important to be giving back to the community.
100% agree with you there. And, I've done a little bit of volunteer work here and there. And it's really, really rewarding at the end of the day. And I know,
It's rewarding.
it really is. And, with the economic environment that we are currently in, a lot of people may not necessarily have the time to go out there and, spend some time volunteering. But if you do have any spare time, on the weekends or when you have a day off work, it is really, really rewarding. But that is, going to your local council and, whether that be helping out in a youth group, as you said, like, as I'm Catholic as well, helping out in Catholic youth groups, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Or even just, going around to the local nursing home, helping out the retirees there. It's any sort of community work and volunteer work is imperative towards society.
And it's not just what you'll do for the group or the elderly people you visit. The rewards that you will get from yourself about, and the lessons you'll learn far outweigh, the effort that you've got to put in.
Yeah, 100% agree with you there, So we'll now move on to our next question for you, Andrew. So this relates a little bit more towards your priesthood time, which many people might actually not know about. But yeah, George.
Yeah. So at the age of 19, you entered the Palatine monastery in the hopes of becoming a priest. What made you want to enter the priesthood, and what key learning outcomes have you taken from your time in the monastery that you now use in Parliament?
Well, I joined the Palatine Monastery because I felt drawn to a life of service. I felt drawn to giving my life to God and my community. And so I went around and I interviewed a lot of different orders of priests, and they were supposed to be interviewing me, but I think I interviewed them. And just to look to see whether our sort of personal philosophies aligned. And I felt that my personal philosophy aligned with the Palatine. St. Vincent Pallotti was an Italian priest back in the late 1800s, and he was really the father of the birth of the laity, way before Second Vatican Council. The church was much more than just the ordained bishops, priests, and religious. The true church was, from the ground up, from the people up, and that really struck a note with me. So I ended up joining them. I was with them for about 8 months, and they decided that my services would be best served somewhere else. They told me that they felt that I wouldn't be able to fulfill my vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And I can say, a few decades later, that they were probably absolutely right.
And that is very, very interesting, because nowadays a lot of young people living in a more secular sort of society don't really consider, becoming a priest or even becoming involved in religious organizations. So it is quite interesting that, when you were our age, when 19 years old, you did enter the monastery for the Palatinians, and, you thought about becoming a priest.
The Palatines, not the Palatinians.
Palatines,
the Palatines.
Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, that is quite interesting though. Very, was it more towards, I guess, your upbringing that you were very, very Catholic? I'm assuming you're coming from a very Catholic family, Andrew.
Look, I mean, I went to church every Sunday. Mum and dad still go to church. Well, they're very much in their their elder years now, but they watch church on television. But I don't know. I felt that I just felt this drawing to a life of service. In my year 11 and year 12, I became a lot more involved in the church. I was very involved with the De La Salle brothers who educated me in my secondary years. And I just felt that that's what I had, a very, very strong sense of a calling to the priesthood. I think my parents were initially they were quite saddened by me joining the priesthood. They thought, that I'd grow to be an old lonely man, and they were very concerned about me joining. But they came around, and in fact, I think they were pretty disappointed when I left.
Yeah, it would be probably a big changing and a big moment in your life, at 19 years old to join the priesthood, and I do understand that concern that your parents had, around you, living a bit of a lonely life.
It's interesting because where I lived was in a monastery in Millgrove in the Yarra Valley Ranges in Melbourne, and this monastery was built for 100 students, and when I started, there was one other bloke in my year. There were two blokes a few years ahead of us, so that's 4, and one deacon. So there were 5 students in a monastery that had been built for over 100 students, and that gives you an idea of how much the world had changed, and that place had been built in the 50s and the 60s. So only 25, 30 years later, it changed very, very significantly, and it was very hard, I think, for me to come to terms with. I had made a decision to give my life to God through service as a priest, and I'd started training, and then they turned around and said, "Yeah, actually, no thanks." And I took that pretty hard, given especially the fact that I was only one of 5. And but I mean, look, at the end of the day, I think they made the right call.
And are you still in contact with the monastery even to this day, or is it still going? Or
it's still there. It's a retreat centre now. I went back there. I've only been back 2 or 3 times since I left in 87. It was 1987. So I've only been back a few times, but a lot of, in fact, I think there's only one person there now, who was the deacon when I was there, and is now who runs the show. So yes, I've had very little to do with them, but that's partly because I moved to Queensland.
Yeah, as well, which I think we'll get into a little bit here. So after your time in the monastery, you entered an apprenticeship as a carpenter, and then continued on to progress into a law degree at the Queensland University of Technology, where you qualified and began working as a barrister in the construction law sector. Andrew, you have a quite different career compared to most transitioning from carpentry to law. Do you believe there is a lot of stigma towards doing a trade? And do you think more people like yourself should try and study later in life and change professions in their 30s instead of working in the same industry for their entire working careers?
Well, if ever I get to writing a book, I've said this to a number of people. If ever I get around to writing a book, I've already got my title chosen, and the title is "You're Not a Tree." And what I mean by that is, if you don't like what you're doing, if you don't like where you live, you're not rooted to the ground. You can pick yourself up and go and do something else. So I think it's really important. You work for a long time, and the old saying, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And I've always tried to embody that sort of philosophy. I think that about 15 years ago or so, Julia Gillard, when she was Prime Minister, she really changed the way higher education was dealt with in Australia. So every young person was encouraged to go to university, and I think that we did the nation a huge disservice by doing that. Now, I've got nothing against going to university. I've been to university, but some kids, some people are not destined to go to university, never have been, never will be, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that we have done ourselves as a nation and many young people a disservice by essentially creating a culture that if you want to be someone in this world, you've got to go to university. And I think that's wrong. It's wrong on so many respects. It's wrong because it demeans people who don't go to university. It demeans the careers that they have or might have in the future. But it's also bad for the country. And those chickens are coming home to roost now. You know, we don't have enough carpenters. We don't have enough plumbers. We don't have enough electricians. We have got a housing crisis. And that is partly because we simply don't have tradespeople to build the houses. Why do we not have tradespeople to build the houses? Because we sent everybody off to university 10, 15 years ago. And we are paying the price for that now. Most tradespeople are earning significantly more than what someone's earning coming out of university with a business degree. And that's because the laws of supply and demand. Young people who go and do an apprenticeship and then start up their own business, they are doing very, very well. Thank you very much, and good luck to them. They took a gamble and they went out. They put up with terrible wages for 4 years during their apprenticeship, they are now in a situation where hopefully they're making a mozza, and good luck to them.
And I totally agree with you there as well, because as we're seeing this housing crisis, we've got such a huge shortage in the construction industry, and we've talked to many MPs about this specifically because it really is a really big issue for our young people out there who in the future may not be able to own their own home. A lot of them, that's how a lot of them are feeling, which is quite disheartening and quite sad. And
Yes,
that all does relate a lot back to, I think, that sort of stigma towards the trades and industry, and electricians, carpenters, and that sort of like bricklayers, plumbers. Like in my cohort, we had quite a number of people doing, trades and that sort of thing in year 11, year 12. But they're
great.
I don't want to sound too disheartening to people who may go into university, but the sort of people who maybe go in and do like a communications degree or go in and do an arts degree, a lot of the time you may not necessarily end up going on to having a good high paying job. And sometimes those sort of people just pick those sort of degrees because they don't know what they're doing. And they may be suited maybe towards doing a trade or doing an apprenticeship of some sort.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I would encourage, I think this, to be quite honest, I think this conversation starts at the kitchen table. And I'm assuming that a lot of your audience are probably people around your age rather than my age. But I want to encourage the mums and dads that might be listening to this, and also to the younger people. If you're an oldie like me, don't discourage your kids from doing a trade. If you get an Australian trade, you can work anywhere in the world, and your trade qualification will be highly regarded, highly respected, because we turn out good tradespeople in Australia. And you will never have a day, or very rarely anyway, you'll never have a day out of work if you're a good quality, hardworking tradesperson trained in Australia. There's not a lot of people who can say that. So mums and dads, when you're having those conversations around the kitchen table, please don't, focus your attention on, encouraging Mary or Bill to become a doctor or a lawyer. There's plenty of opportunity, and we need doctors and lawyers, but we also need our carpenters and bricklayers and plumbers and fitters and turners and motor mechanics.
Exactly. And that sort of thing, as you said, has to start the kitchen table. And we can't continuously push people to go to university if their minds are they're not suited for it, because it's a waste for them if they're spending 3-4 years doing a degree that they don't like. And at the end of that, they could be, as you said, getting an apprenticeship at the same period of time, earning a little bit of money. But when you get that qualifications, eventually, if you set up your own business, as he said, you could be earning a lot more money than someone who might have done that degree and will be stuck at a medium to low paying wage for the considerable amount of their life. So I do agree with you there.
Yeah, look, the universities will say, people who study in university and get a degree earn X number of dollars more than people who don't. I'd question that stat nowadays if you compare a degree qualification versus a trade qualification. I would really question that, because there's a lot of people with trade qualifications with their own businesses. They're their own boss, and they're doing very well, much better than what a lot of people I know who've been to university.
100% agree with you there, Andrew. So we'll move on to our next question. So George, I believe it's with you.
Yep. So, you're also a keen disability advocate, with your daughter being born with a segment missing from a 16 chromosome. Do you think more should be done to help those who suffer from a disability? And how did your own experience with your daughter change your conception of people with disabilities?
Well, I think like most things, George, you don't know what you don't know, and I had very little exposure to the disability sector, certainly growing up and as a young adult. And when we had our fourth daughter, that was our entrance into the disability sector, and so it certainly changed our lives as a family, my life as a dad. And I believe that I have a much greater empathetic view of people's lives, people who live with disabilities. And look, Sarah's very forthright in what she tells me. She was telling me off the other day for something I was saying about autism. I use the phrase, I think we're all a little bit autistic at times. And Sarah says, no, Dad, that demeans people who do suffer from autism. So she's very quick to correct me if she thinks I've got it wrong. But people who live with disabilities, physical and or psychological disabilities, intellectual disabilities, want the same as you and me. They want to be happy. They want to lead a fulfilling life. They want to contribute to society. They want to live independently. And some, not all, some want to go on and have families. So they want what you and I want, but they want, I think, the most important thing they want is they want to be included. That inclusion in our everyday life in community is so very important. And thankfully, gone are the days where we stick our people who are disabled into homes, and so that we don't have to look at them. I think there's a much greater appreciation in the community for what people who live with disabilities are able to achieve. And I think that the Paralympic Games and the Commonwealth Games play a very important role in that. I think we've all marveled at Paralympic athletes at the feats that, in fact, I prefer to watch the Paralympics than the Olympics, because I just love seeing the challenges that some people face, and they've overcome those odds and excel, in the meantime. So I think there's a lot of inspiration and learnings that able-bodied people can learn from people who live with disabilities.
Exactly. And those sort of stories in the Paralympics that they have, whether that be, losing a limb, or some a car crash or a fatal or an accident that happened in the past, or they were born with these sort of conditions. And those sort of inspiring stories are very, very relatable for a lot of people who have disabilities, and a really good story to tell for people who are able, who, don't have those sort of disabilities. And it's a good way to raise awareness towards certain issues and certain disabilities that people have across the nation and across the world. And I think, George, you're going to ask a question again to Andrew relating towards funding around people with disabilities.
So, do you think more should be done to help people with disabilities, like funding?
Look, you've always got to balance the need of people with the cost to society, and the NDIS is a great example of that. The concept of the NDIS is a terrific concept. It's one that's helped my daughter and has helped countless people. who live with disabilities. But it's a matter of getting the balance right, because what we don't want to do is have a situation where the NDIS is abused or exploited by service providers. And I'm not suggesting that all service providers are exploiting it, but some certainly are. And what that does is that means that people who are in genuine need are receiving less because money is going to those who may not deserve it. And I think so. It's always a horrible challenge to try and get that balance right. And look, we know that there are people who are flagrantly defrauding the system, and those people absolutely should have the book thrown at them. So it's a challenge. We're now spending around or just slightly over $33 billion a year on the NDIS. And within around 10 years, the NDIS is expected to reach costs, if we're on our current trajectory, of over $100 billion a year. Now, that's substantially more than what we spend on defence. At the moment, we spend more money on the NDIS than we do on Medicare for the whole country. So the system needs to be, I think, fine-tuned. Interestingly, when Bill Shorten, the current minister for the NDIS, when he was in opposition, he continuously went around saying, the NDIS doesn't need to be changed, it doesn't need to be modified. And as soon as he got in, he started changing things and cutting people's packages back. So it's an insidious issue where you've got a real need, and that those real needs can cost very substantial sums of money. But we live in an environment, in a community where we do want to take care of people who are in genuine need, and I think that's an admirable thing for this country.
100% agree with you there, Andrew. And those sort of, I think the government did invest a little bit in the budget recently into investigating and trying to stop those NDIS frauds and that sort of thing. But I think more adamant action, I think, is needed towards trying to fix the system, because I think any Australian agrees that that sort of money to the people who really need it is really crucial via the NDIS. But we can't have people taking money out of it, and we can't have taxpayers paying for some people to live lavish lifestyles via the NDIS.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah. We'll move on now to our next question for you, Andrew. So I do recognize we are limited on time. So our next question for you is, who would you say is your political role model or idol?
Well, I wouldn't use the term idol. It's not something that I would subscribe to. Look, I've thought long and hard about this question, and thanks for sending it to me beforehand. My political mentor was a beautiful woman by the name of Elizabeth Worthington. Now, Elizabeth was my campaign manager from the time I was pre-selected right through to her passing in January of this year. She was an incredibly generous, astute, politically motivated woman, and I mean that in the good sense. And I learnt so much from Elizabeth. I don't have my political mentor was John Howard or whatever. I don't have someone like that. My political mentor was Elizabeth Worthington, and I'm looking for another one.
That's a very, very solid option there. I don't know too much about Elizabeth, but we've heard a lot about John Howard previously on the podcast, so it's nice to see some sort of disparity and sort of change. And I'm pretty sure you might have watched some of our episodes where a lot of our Liberal MPs especially were talking a lot about John Howard. So it's good to have that sort of variety around political idols and role models. So we'll move on to our next question for you, Andrew. George.
What made you run in the 2016 federal election for the Liberal Party, and what made you join the Liberal Party?
Look, I come from a family of small business. Mum had her business, Dad had his business. My grandfathers both had their own businesses, come from a long line of small business. I've always grown up with a philosophy of if you work hard, if you put your shoulder to the wheel, if you give it your all, then you'll be rewarded. So that's kind of been my philosophy and still is. So the Liberal Party is the party for small business, and we know the Liberal National Party, the LNP in Queensland. It's a merged party for your listeners who might be watching this outside of Queensland. We believe in reward for effort. We believe in small government, as small as it possibly can be. We believe in lower taxes. We believe in things like freedom of association, freedom of religion, freedom of thought, and freedom from fear. So, it's very much a party that aligns with my personal philosophies. And, I don't agree with everything. I don't think you'll ever find any party that you 100% agree with. But the overwhelming philosophy and policy direction of the Liberal National Party is one that accords with my own.
And I do like that point that you raised around, Liberal National Party not necessarily representing all of your views and ideologies, because at the end of the day, not one person can be tied down towards a political ideology and a political party. So I think that's one of the great things about the Liberal National Party and the Liberals and Nationals in general, that, there is that sort of freedom of conscience vote, and you can vote against party lines if your conscience allows you to. So that's one of the great things about the Liberals and Nationals compared to Labor, for example.
Totally agree, Francis. We want to encourage that freedom of thought, and do encourage that freedom of thought. And what that means is that people are going to cross the floor from time to time. And I don't know if we encourage it, but we certainly don't discourage it. If someone feels very strongly about something, by all means, cross the floor, vote in accordance with your conscience. Whereas on the other side of the political fence, with the Labor Party, if you don't toe the political line, then you're disendorsed. Well, that is an anathema to the philosophy that we hold in the Liberal National Party. We don't believe that that big government or big party has all of the answers, and that everybody has to fall into line. We respect the rights of the individual. And that is one of the main differences between the two parties. We respect the individual, whereas the Labor Party, for them, it's all about the common, what they would regard to be the common good.
We're up to our final question for you, Andrew. So I hope you prepared something very, very good for this. This is our top-notch question, our best question of the whole interview. What is some advice you'd give to students in 2024? Especially those in studying university or high school?
Well, for your high school students that might be watching this, I would suggest that they stick at it. It's really important that I think in today's day and age, that they try and at least get a Year 12 education. For your university students, I would say that, as I have often said to university students, you'll study hard, hopefully, work hard, and in 4 years' time, you'll get a certificate. It might be a degree, it might be a diploma, but when you finish, you think that you might know it all, but really the reality is you don't know much at all. That piece of paper gives you what I call a license to learn, which you then need to take to an employer and say, Madam Employer, Madam Accountant, Madam Lawyer, Madam whatever, Architect, here's my license to learn. Will you now teach me? I think a lot of people finish university with a view that they want to walk into $100,000 a year job, and that the last 4 years has taught them everything that they need to know about whatever chosen career they're going to go into. And unfortunately, nothing could be further from the truth. it's when you get out and start working for a living that you really start to learn about how your chosen career operates. For those of you who might be watching this and are doing an apprenticeship or considering doing an apprenticeship, I don't need to tell you this. A 4-year apprenticeship is hard yakka, particularly if you're working for someone who you may not necessarily like. What I would say to you is tough it out. 4 years is a long time. The pay is pretty terrible. It's better than what you get at university, but which is nothing. But tough it out, hang in there, because once you finish, then the rewards start to come your way. And I'll go back to what I earlier said about, an Australian trade qualification will enable you to travel the world and never be out of work.
Exactly that. And I think the main sort of point you're raising there is just continuously fight through anything, just tough it out. Even with university, it may be a hard slog for those 3-4 years, but tough it out. And as he said, at the end of the day, life is a big book, and you continuously learn every single day. So don't think you know everything, even after university. And I guess it's always, if you do a trade and apprenticeship, even if you finish your apprenticeship, you still don't know everything about your trade. So you're still learning constantly. So life is really just a big book. You are learning every single day. Exactly.
Absolutely.
So yeah, those are all our questions for you, Andrew. I do really appreciate you coming on the podcast and speaking to us in this afternoon. After probably a very busy day of being in the political office and being a parliamentarian, we do really appreciate you coming on and speaking to us a bit about your interesting career before politics. Being in a monastery to becoming a tradie to becoming a lawyer, and I'm talking a little bit about some advice you'd give to students who are studying in university or high school. So we do really appreciate you coming on, as I said previously.
My pleasure, Francis. And George, well done. And can I congratulate you on your great initiative?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good on you. Thank you.
Yeah.